Jayson Tatum, concerned about the perception of a monster year and shot selection, talking to JJ Redick, and we're going to talk about it right now on the Locked On Celtics podcast.
Be ever ready. Recognize the city of champs. Boston, baby, we do what you can't. Locked on number 18, Tatum and Brown, J-team, step back. We gon' wet that and slay teams. Of course, the Celtics, who else could it be? Screaming like KG with the Larry O.B. Karalis above average, assessing the team status. Best daily pod, no cap, salary matching. Clutch like Bird the DJ, keep John on replay. Prime time, dapping up the truth on the sideline. Raining J's, how it started, raising banners, how we finished. Locked on Celtics pod, home of the winners. B.
Hey there, welcome back to the Locked On Celtics podcast. Thank you for making this show part of your daily routine and your first listen every day. Locked On Celtics is free. It's available everywhere. It's on YouTube. You don't really have an excuse for not listening to or watching the show, unless you think it sucks, and then why would you even be here at this point? So thank you for subscribing. I'm John Karalis. I cover the Boston Celtics for Boston Sports Journal. I've written a book called The Boston Celtics All-Time All-Stars, and I was one of the media voters on the Boston Celtics 75th anniversary team. Instead of kind of going back and rehashing some of the stuff from the regular season and All-Star break, Jayson Tatum is going on to JJ Redick's podcast, Old Man in the Three. And the podcast actually drops on Friday, but an 11-minute preview came out and was so good, so chock full of stuff to talk about, that Tom Westerholm and I decided that we just had to spend this entire podcast talking about it. Today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. Tom, Tatum, let me just start with one little nitpicky thing. In this clip, Tatum says, "Oh, this is my first opportunity to talk about this." No, it's not. No, we've asked you about this. This is your first opportunity to talk to somebody you respect about.
Which respecting people is part of the people that he respects. We will get into why those are not the media members.
That's right. To be fair, yes, you're correct. To be fair, there is some reason to have some animosity, or kind of like a side eye, like media, huh? Mm-hmm. So no, I don't blame him at all. But you know what? This is what happens though with these guys. You get them in. There's two situations that you get NBA players in. Now, it's not just Tatum. Most NBA players, you get them into either ESPN major, like, oh, okay, I know it's ESPN, so I know everybody's going to see it, so I got to be my best self, or talking to another NBA player, a former NBA player. Those guys, they just have they understand, you get it, you know the grind, you understand where I'm coming from, you've done a lot of this stuff. They so yes, they're going to be more open, and I totally get that. So let's dive into this, because the first thing that we talked that stood out to you especially was the concept of him watching and listening to outlets wherever talking about who's had a monster season. And he had a 26.7 rebound, 4 assist year last year. And he says, you can't find one person on the media that said I had a monster year. 7th seed, 2 games above 500. It's whatever. I wasn't an MVP candidate. But then there are guys that averaged 19, 10, and 4. And people go on TV and it's like they're having a monster season. So he is now upset to some degree that the concept of who's having a monster season and who's not is different, and that he's not being, I guess, perceived fairly. Is that what's your take on this?
Well, I think it's really nuanced, and I want to say before we get going that when I heard him say that, one of my first instincts was to Google Jayson Tatum monster just to see if I could find anything. And I was like, I wonder if that's accurate. And I got to say, I found this one on Boston Sports Journal by one John Karalis, Jayson Tatum monster, and it said, Karalis, Jayson Tatum is in a monster funk. So you, sir, you. So I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Come on. Let me give him the I told you. Oh, dope.
I had to yank that rug from under you. No, I think it's a really interesting and really nuanced conversation because Tatum is, to an extent, I think, 100% right that there is sort of a double standard. And when you kind of think about things from a truly like 25,000 foot view, there probably is not enough appreciation for a 23-year-old who is putting up 26, 7, and 4. Like, I think, within Boston, there's a lot of Celtics fans. I mean, there's a lot of people who like to make noise and a lot of people who like to like generate hot takes who will, talk trash about Tatum and say he's bad, whatever. I think there are a lot of people in Boston who really do appreciate, a lot of fans, a lot of, people who are, around the team, certainly, who are like, this guy's amazing. And, it's amazing that a 23-year-old is doing 26, 7 and 4. Mm-hmm. All of that's aside, I also think that like it kind of cuts both ways where what Tatum wants to be is like an all-time great. He wants to be an MVP in the league. Mm-hmm. And I think to that end, yeah, I mean, 26, 7, and 4 is amazing. It is an amazing feat to do that in the NBA against the quality of competition that he faces. But at the same time, it is just kind of par for the course for the level that he wants to get to. Like, he wanted to be Kobe Bryant, and he is like when he was a kid, he wanted to be Kobe Bryant, and he actually has a chance to achieve many, if not most, if not all of the things that Kobe Bryant achieved during his basketball career. And to that end, 26, 7, and 4 is not monstrous. Like, it's very, very good. It is setting him on a great path, as a 23-year-old, but it's not a monster season if that's where you're trying to get to and where you currently are. Right. So I think that there's a lot of nuance in that part, especially where he's right. Like, he probably doesn't get the credit for being, maybe nationally, especially as good as he's been. But at the same time, that's not it seems to me that what his goals are much higher than that, much loftier than that.
This is all a matter of expectations, right? And when you set certain expectations, reactions are relative to those expectations. And so when, like, Grant Williams, we can say is like, wow, he is having a great year. Would I say he's having a monster season? I wouldn't be surprised if somebody's like saying he's having a monster season from 3. Yeah. And that would be like, for him, relative to the expectations, it is a monster season. Just like guys sign a max contract. Marcus Smart just signed a maximum extension, which was the most money that he could get, which is basically half of what Jayson Tatum's max is. The expectations, the situations are different, but it does shed the light on Jayson Tatum wants certain things, like you said, and that stuff matters to him more than he lets on, because you wouldn't give a damn about it's not like he's sitting there crying about it, but he is in a way being like, questioning it, the perception of the monster year. And look, 26, 7, and 4 that's Jayson Tatum numbers now, man. Yeah. This is just what we expect from you. Is it a monster season? Like, yeah, it's a good season, but you are a victim of your own expectations. Like, LeBron should be the MVP. LeBron should be like a 12-time MVP, but he's not. And because he has certain expectations, and other people outperformed their own expectations and they get MVP votes. The team, like, there's something about the team that has to be an element to that. Like, you can be a good player that gets your stats, and if your team is like they were last year, 7th seeds, just 2 games above 500, that dings you. That dings you, because, like, hey, you're a star. Yeah, you're having a monster season. You're like, yeah, have a good season, but what good is that? What good is that doing anybody? Like, if you're just looking out for yourself, then yeah, great. But if you're looking out for the team, like, there's that element. And I'm not accusing him of not looking out for the team. I do believe Jayson Tatum does want to win and all of that stuff. So that's not where that's going, but that's the perception. So I think Tatum does, like, he certainly has a point, but I think he does need to understand that for him to be perceived as having a monster season. He even says it. You got to go out and average 30 or whatever and have your team be a top 2-3 seed. That's when like the expectations are a certain thing, and you gotta outperform that now.
Definitely. And I do, to your point, just to back it up briefly, I do think it's important to say, like, you know, when we say he's like upset about this stuff, it just means like we don't mean that he's like you said, he wasn't crying on the podcast. He was kind of chuckling about it, honestly. Like he seemed like I think side eye that you said earlier was the right way of putting it. He's kind of looking at everybody like, come on, I had 26, 7 and 4. And that's like,
right.
Good point, man. Like, yeah, you had 26, 7 and 4. And I thought the way that he framed it was really interesting too, because I think it kind of hammered home something. You know, we talk about him, you know, in these terms of like NBA star, right? NBA superstar, all this stuff. And he said, you know, he talks to his mom and he was like, Mom, I would have to average And that was really interesting to phrase it because it kind of humanized him in this way of like just like the human achievement of scoring 26 points in per game in the NBA is incredible. And he's right about that. Like when you just think of it in those terms, like he's just a 23-year-old dude who is really good at basketball. Yeah. And to the point that like he does have all these expectations and he put them on himself by being so good, right? Like he put them on himself by leading the team in scoring his rookie year and them going to the Eastern Conference Finals, by being the best player on an Eastern Conference Finalist in 2020, by scoring 50 points 4 times the next season. Like his greatness, like brought these expectations up. But you're right. Like the garden variety good NBA player having a monster season is just baseline for Jayson Tatum. And I mean, that's got to be kind of hard for him, right? Because like you will see other guys getting this adulation, like this, like, you know, people on ESPN screaming about how good they are when they're not as good as Jayson Tatum. But that just is what it is when you're that good. Like people expect that of you. So yeah, I mean, it's complicated. And I do feel for him because I mean, it would probably be nice to hear on ESPN, you know, people like screaming about how he's having it, or I mean, to his point, and the point that he made was it's not so much about the money, it's about the recognition. Like he wanted to be all NBA, and that's perfectly understandable and fair, you know, based on all of the things that we just said. But yeah, I mean, I think it kind of cuts both ways in that way where it's like, you know, I think when we talk, the way we talk about him, we also need to understand that he's really, really good and that should be acknowledged. But he also needs to understand that he's so good that we can't acknowledge it every time. And we can't, you know, can't acknowledge a 26, 7 and 4 to like the extent that it would be if it was Grant Williams. It's not Grant, it's Jayson Tatum. And yeah, these things are expected of you now.
The sunrise is amazing.
Right.
I'm not going to sit there in the morning, every morning go, oh my God, look at that sunrise. Like, yeah, I get it. The sunrise, like, it's beautiful. I acknowledge that it's beautiful. It's spectacular that the earth rotates and all that. Like, but it happens all the time. Like, I'm just not going to be amazed by it all the time.
Yeah. So. And again, this hammers home how great Jayson Tatum is that we are comparing his 26, 7 and 4 to the sunrise.
Yes. Yes.
And I mean,
he's a really good player.
He's that good. And like, yeah, just with that territory comes less praise, I guess, diminishing returns.
That's exactly it. Ask Greg Popovich, who should be coach of the year like every year. Ask, like I said, LeBron or Kevin Durant. At some point, it just becomes normal. But I will say that one of the things that holds him back or has held him back has been the inefficiency. And he talked about the shot profile. He and JJ Redick talked about the shot profile. And we'll talk about that. Let's fold that in just a minute. First, I want to talk to you about BetOnline, which is the place to go for all your betting needs. Football's over, but basketball is in full steam. About 20 some odd games to go in the NBA. College hoops, we're coming up to March Madness soon. So for all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, and where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC, odds, right to Olympic coverage and information. So head on over to the website or use your mobile device to learn about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Please gamble responsibly. Hey, thanks for making Locked On Celtics your first listen every day. Make Locked On Now your second listen every day. It's a great recap of the night in the association. You get local experts whenever there's a game. You get each side, each host of that Locked On team will record something and give you their take on the game. So you get each side represented on Locked On Now. It's a great way to get caught up on the night in the league. Let's bring Tom Westerholm back in to continue this conversation about Jayson Tatum. And the clip actually starts with JJ Redick talking about, oh, people always want to complain about your shot profile. And now, as a person myself who has written multiple pieces about Jayson Tatum's shot profile, I was like, yeah, okay. Because he was like, yeah, you just got to accept, when you're great, when somebody's great, you just got to accept some of the things that they do. And I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't actually. Because I think Jayson Tatum can be better. And he was, at that point, he was 22, 23. Like, are we just going to sit there and be like, yeah, he's fully formed at 23? I would go so far as to say, as Tom, I would think it's disrespectful. I take it as a sign of, like, you don't think I can get any better if you're not challenging me at that age to say, oh, you're doing certain things wrong. Because at 22, 23, Jayson Tatum was taking too many jump shots, too many mid-range shots, too many fadeaways. The numbers, the percentages all said what they said. And even Ime Udoka, for God's sake, his new coach came in and said, you've got to play differently. So I shoot back at JJ Redick and say that the shot profile was a problem and he did need to change, and he has, and he's better for it.
I think that's the key part, is that it was a little strange that Redick was like, people used to complain about your shot profile. And it's like, well, the thing is that Jayson Tatum is a much more efficient basketball player. He has improved, right? And he shoots more threes. He gets to the free throw line more. He goes to the rim more. Like, he does all these things that are better now. And that deserves, I think, more acknowledgement than his previous inconsistencies, because his previous inefficiencies, again, were when he was like 21 and he was like just kind of coming into the league. And now he's 23 and he's much, much better. And I think that was a weird section for me, because Tatum is better. And if you mentioned Udoka, I mean, after the last game, Tatum took that mid-range shot, at the buzzer to try to win it. And Udoka said, we were trying to get something going downhill. Like, he kind of suggested, we're kind of hoping to get something a little bit closer to the basket. Mm-hmm. And Tatum has shown that he can drive to the hoop and absorb all this contact and score over people and all these things that make him so much better as a player. So yeah, I mean, that to me just didn't seem particularly, particularly cogent. Like Jayson Tatum is a better player as a result of taking more efficient shots and ditching some of the less efficient ones. And that's not to say that the less efficient ones have no place in the game, right? And I mean, any analytics person will tell you that yes, if you've got a guy who can hurt you from mid-range, especially when defenses are so squishy there in the pick and roll, that's really valuable. That was the whole concept behind Kemba Walker that didn't end up working out, was that it's great to have that, that guy who can punish defenses in mid-range. But yeah, I mean, the fact that Tatum now builds his game around three-pointers and drives is just so beneficial for everyone involved, up to and including Jayson Tatum.
I think it's just important to realize that he's not a good mid-range shooter. He's just not. He's I was going to look those up, but I got a point to make here.
Make your point. I'll look up your stats for you.
If you could, while I'm ranting and raving, look up Jayson Tatum's mid-range, because I'm telling you, his mid-range, when we're talking about mid-range shooting, right? It's not that analytics say never shoot mid-range. You can shoot mid-range. You just got to shoot it at a certain level. Just like a three-pointer, you got to shoot it at a certain level, or else maybe you want to do something a little bit different. It's all about what can you do, what can you do well, and even some of the greats can't do some things as well as they do other things. It's just how it is. LeBron James has never been a knockdown shooter. He's been a good shooter and okay from three, and but he's LeBron. He's a bull going downhill and whatever. So everybody's got a thing. And Jayson Tatum, the numbers that he put up, when you talk about why aren't people saying you have a monster year? Because then you can look at his numbers and say, you put up 26, but you're doing it on 26 shots a game or something like that. And if you're inefficient, then that detracts from your overall numbers. And, for all the analytics and for all of the judgments of players that we do on the outside, players themselves are still very much caught up in the counting stats.
Yes.
And when a guy averages 30, he averages 30, right? And 30 is obviously a big number, but like when a guy, and you sit there and say like, hey man, I'm putting up 25 points a game. Like, okay, how are you doing it? And a lot of players like, what do you mean? How am I'm putting the ball in the basket? And how many tries does it take you to put the ball in the basket?
Right.
From where on the floor are you putting the ball in the basket? Is there a room for improvement? And that's my number one. My number one thing with Tatum has been his shot selection. Up until this season, his shot selection was poor because he really relied on those mid-range fadeaways, isolations. And this year they're getting away from it. And you can tell, like, this is the Jayson Tatum that will be an MVP candidate at some point.
Definitely.
Was that enough time to do the stats?
Yes, I got you. So if you look like right in the middle, basically around like the nail, like the free throw line, he's 13 for 48 this season. So 27%. So, I mean, for one thing,
that's terrible.
It's not good. I mean, there's sections kind of all over the, all over the court where, it varies a little bit. Like if you look like above the free throw line, like extended, but still inside the 3-point line, he's very good. But if you go a little to the left or a little to the right, he's very bad. Like it's, there's sections all over the court where it matters where he's shooting from. And again, like a lot of these shots are, like some of them are good shots, right? Like, especially like, on the side of the hoop a little bit, some of those that he takes, decent shots. However, yeah, I mean, like when you consider from just like a pure numbers perspective, right? Like, a 3-pointer is worth 3 points and a layup is, goes in 59.5% of the time for Tatum. So those are obviously the most efficient shots and the ones that like they should be trying to focus on, in addition to free throws, which incidentally he's taking 6 of this year, which is a career high. So yeah, I mean, it's not rocket science. It's like, these are not when people talk about advanced analytics, they are not talking about like shot charts. They are not talking about like this type of thing. These are just details. Like there's nothing advanced about them. It's just like kind of paying attention a little bit more closely.
Here it is, 15 to 19 feet this season, 40%. 40%, 15 to 19 feet this season. Let's go back to the last season. Last season, he was 15 to 19 feet, 36.6%. Let's go to the season before. In 2019-20, 15 to 19 feet. He was 42%. That just doesn't do it. That just doesn't do it, man. You got to be like 50%.
You literally have to be 50% because like 33% from 3 produces the same amount of points as 50% from 2. So you like if you're going to shoot 33% from 3, you might as well just take more threes. So,
right.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. I mean, aside from, the slow start. So, and I'll just go back to I'll wrap it up with my original point, where when I was playing, my coach just yelled at me a lot and, MF'd me up and down the floor. And, we had a conversation about it. And he was like, I yell at you because I think you can do more. If I didn't yell at you, it's because that's as good as you're going to be. And I'm not mad at it. You're just, if you're bad at something, like that's just how you are. And I'm just going to let you play. But if I'm mad at you, it's because I don't think you're doing everything that you are capable of doing. And that's just pushing. And this is the same concept to me when it comes to criticizing Tatum in his shot selection, because I see a guy that has the potential to be an MVP, but the way he had been doing it, relying on these mid-range shots a lot more, that was not going to cut it. And he had to change. And I'm glad that Ime Udoka came in and made him change, because this guy, the way he attacks the rim, that guy is like MVP caliber, because now that guy opens up passing lanes and his assist numbers are going to go up. When your efficiency numbers go up and those other counting stats go up, and like 26, 7, and 4 versus 26, 8, and 8 on better efficiency is like, whoa, much better. Now that's a monster season. That's a monster season. Yep. So,
yep. And I think, like, it's funny because when you talk about, like, he was like, I wasn't an MVP candidate. And like looking at it, the way that he can kind of get to certain points in his career, because if he was trying to score 30 points a game, it would be, I don't know that would be ideal for the Celtics, right? Because if he was trying to score 30, that means he's not passing as much. That means that, like, his usage is like ridiculously high. So, I don't think anybody's really looking for him to have like a James Harden 2017-18 season where he's putting up like 30 and 9 assists like per game, right? Like that's not a monster season. I think he's wrong when he says that it's a 30. I think that the broader point is a super efficient season, 27 points a game with more assists. You're right. That is monster. That, like, for him, that's much more, I think, what, for me personally, I can't speak for every media member, and I don't think he was. I think he was talking more about the Stephen A's of the world than the Tom Westerholms of the world. But I, for one, say 28-8 would be a monster season for you, Jayson Tatum. So,
yeah, and look, I don't think 30 points is that far off. He's averaging just about 26 right now, right? And his field goal percentage is at 43.4. So that can change. That can go up a little bit. His 3-point percentage is down. So just by normalizing those shooting percentages, taking the exact same shots and getting to the free throw line, he's there 6 times a game. If you get there 7 and a half. So increase your field goal percentage and get to the line just 1 or 2 more times a game. And that'll be 30 right there. He only needs 4 more points. So
absolutely.
It's super easy. Just keep doing what you're doing, and that'll level off. I mean, normally he's at 45% of field goal percentage and 38% from 3. Do that with the types of shots that he's getting now and everything like that. 30 points a game is going to come. And, his assists are at 4.2 right now, but he can get those up, and they've been up over the winning streak since over those 9 games. So MVP season is right there for him. But his big complaint is all NBA.
Right.
And so let's get into the whole all NBA stuff, because I do agree with Jayson Tatum there. Somebody like me shouldn't be costing him $30 million. So I'll be talking about that when I come back. Don't spend $30 million to get your car parts, which is what's it going to feel like if you go to a dealership or one of those chain stores. Go to rockauto.com instead. Why choose to spend 30 to 50 to 100% more for the same parts at a chain store or car dealership that you can get at rockauto.com, a family business doing it for over 20 years, helping do-it-yourselfers. No matter how complicated the part, whether you are somebody who knows what happens when you pop the hood and you look at everything and you know, oh yeah, I know all this stuff, versus me, who I'm like, none of that stuff makes any sense in the world, but I can get my wipers and my headlights and my floor mats and stuff like that. I can do that at rockauto.com as well. Save yourself the time, the hassle, going and talking to somebody that doesn't know what the hell you're talking about. Just go to rockauto.com, enter all that information. You can cruise through their catalog, which has all different price points to fit your budget. It's really worth the trip. So go check out rockauto.com. When you do buy something, I feel like you will, write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box? That's the only way they know we sent you. So if you go, you buy something, write that Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box? It's an amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So the rest of this podcast, or this clip, we're going 30 plus minutes into a 10-minute clip of the podcast, promoting another podcast, but it's gonna be fun. The Marcus Smart,
Internet 2022, baby, let's get it.
Let's do it. But like the Marcus Smart was on earlier this week, and that was a fun episode. This episode, I'm sure, is going to get even better when we get to the rest of it. So, but Jason made he was a very valid point about the All NBA voting last year, which was this is the NBA at its like worst. This is a bad decision. It was a bad decision to tie contracts into media voting postseason awards. That is just a terrible idea, because you listen to some of the reasons why people vote the way they do. And Jason really has a point. And I hate to like call out, was it Ramona Shelburne last year, who's like, I'm a narrative driven voter. And I think like LeBron, the narrative of, post Kobe death and him raising the team up, and that makes him an MVP. Like, whoa. Like that, there are plenty of voters who think like that the story behind it, the narrative behind it is like really the driving force. And then there are people who are like very cold numbers, like what do your numbers do? And when Jayson Tatum missed All NBA, he missed out on $30 million for his contract extension, which, as he says, no one's crying for me. My lifestyle didn't change, so I'm not like crying about it either. But, hey, look, $30 million is $30 million. No matter how much money I ever make in my life, if I hit the lottery and there's $30 million on the table, like if you don't have that, like that's always meaningful to somebody. So that's going to mean something. So he didn't make the All NBA team, partly because of the media voting, partly because he was listed as a guard for some reason, and he split the guard votes. And Kyrie Irving, who got less points than Jayson Tatum, but more points as a guard, got All NBA. And Jayson Tatum, who got more points, but his were more split, didn't get All NBA. That makes no sense whatsoever. None whatsoever. And he's right. He says that's going to change. That absolutely has to change.
Yeah, the guard thing is funny because it almost feels like voters being a little too smart by half, right? Because it's like you say that, okay, like Jayson Tatum was a guard. You can look at they actually made this point about DeMar DeRozan, where they said traditionally DeRozan might be considered a 3. As it is, he's the primary initiator for the Bulls, so he's sort of a 1. Mm-hmm. So it's very hard to classify him. And it's like Tatum almost, you call him a guard. It's like his usage rate was that of a guard, but he wasn't a guard. It's
right.
Like it almost feels like the voters outsmarting themselves a little bit. But regardless, I think the big point here is one that you made, and that's like if you ask most media members, I think they probably would tell you, I don't want my vote to be tied to players' money.
Yeah.
Like for one thing, Tatum himself said it. He's like, I don't remember exactly how he phrased it. I think he's like that's a little too much to be riding on this, don't you think? Like that's $30 million is a lot to be riding on somebody who, I don't know, watched the Chicago Bulls all year. Somebody who like that person should be voting for Jayson Tatum to make $30 million or not. That's crazy. So yeah, I mean that's the one thing, and then it's just like. I'll let you go. You have a point there, but I think like he's right. That's way too much responsibility to be riding on that.
And it totally is. And your point's a good one here where, okay, I'm not a voter and I shouldn't be a voter. I cover the Boston Celtics. I do some national stuff. I do Locked On NBA and all of that. I have a decent grasp on national stuff, but also I'm hyper focused on the Celtics. And so there's no way the national people who follow the league from afar and don't have one team that they focus on all the time. It's the 30,000 foot view most of the time until they say, oh, the Celtics are on a winning streak. Let's drill down on what's going on there. And then you take a closer look. But that stuff it's a lot of it is filled in by narratives. It's like one of my favorite things to say, just in human psychology, is that the human brain does not accept blanks, right? Whenever there's a blank somewhere in some story somewhere, we fill in that blank somehow. And like, the ancient Greeks, my ancestors, didn't know how the sun went across the sky. So they invented gods who pulled the sun across the sky in a chair. Like that's what human brains do. So when it comes to the NBA, there are narratives. You can't help but rely on other people's opinions to shape your own, because it's impossible. You can't watch 18 games a night. You go crazy. So for me, I listen to podcasts all the time. And so if I want to get caught up on the Bulls, I'm listening to Locked On Bulls a couple of episodes to hear their takes on it. Be like, okay, this is what I'm watching for. This is what they're doing. Let me kind of follow their lead and see. And if you're following that and you don't have the full, none of these people have the full grasp of the league. It's just impossible. To then turn around and have those people's votes tied to money is insane. It's absolute insanity. And it absolutely needs to, they need to figure out a different system. Voters do, by and large, I think, put in a lot of effort and they try to get it 100% right. And I think most of the time they're like 95% on point, right? Every once in a while you get an outlier. Every once in a while you get emotions involved and an unpopular player who had a great season gets kind of like the shaft.
Yep.
Okay. That happens. The voters
seems to happen less in basketball than it does in baseball, however.
Yeah, baseball's a whole other thing. Baseball's like the most, never mind. We'll save that for a baseball podcast.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, man, it's hard. Like if I did have an all NBA vote, I would feel like I would need to sit down for a week and like, okay, I have my initial list. Let me make sure I'm going through everything, all the statistics, the on-offs, all of that stuff. Let me see. Is there anything that I'm missing? I would feel compelled to do that just in general, because I think all NBA means more than all-star. When money is tied into it, if they said, John, you're a voter next year and money is still tied into it, I'd be like, oh crap.
Yeah.
Oh crap. Because now it's like, I'm going to have to keep like a year-long spreadsheet. I'm going to be like maniacal. I'm going to be like, okay, everything happened, this and that. I'm going to be like, forget my family, forget every relationship, like forget all that stuff. I'm now focused on this vote because I don't want to cost because when they release that voting and they go, oh, John Karalis voted for who? Oh God. And that's the vote. That third place vote is what switched somebody. Oh yeah, that's Karalis vote. That cost somebody, $30 million. I'd be like, oh God, no. I quit. I retire. I'm done. Who was that dude that gave like Andre Drummond an all defensive player, like first team all defense, and Hassan Whiteside second place?
Yep.
Because
he was one of my first thoughts when Redick and Tatum got started. Yeah, 100%. But it's not like he's almost not the point. Like your point is like, Zach Lowe, one of the greatest NBA writers the greatest writer of our generation, from an NBA perspective, like one of the greatest of all time. You will often hear him on his podcast be like, well, I hadn't watched this team in a while, so I had to catch one of their games. And it's like, this is like one of the smartest, like most well-read, well-watched people imaginable. Like, he reports on the league. He calls people, all this stuff. And it's like, even Zach is like, I hadn't watched this team in a couple of games or whatever it is, so I had to like pop them on. And it's like we are like the best one is like that. The rest of us are down here.
Yeah.
Like what does that tell you? I also don't have a vote, so I guess us is a bit of allowing myself a little bit of leeway here. But the rest of us, like we should not be deciding $30 million decisions for these guys. And I think too, the other thing that drives me nuts about it is that it makes even more tense an already fraught relationship between the media and the players. And it's just like, this is like the NBA did like the media pretty dirty by doing this, by just being like, well, you guys can do it, right? And I know that like when you like coaches have an agenda, right? Like they would like to keep their salary cap as low as possible. So, whereas like players would have an agenda for teammates or friends or whatever. Like we've seen how player all-star voting goes, and like so it's. Like, yeah, somebody's got to do it. You got to figure it out somehow. But the media doing it, this is not it. Like, whatever that, like, like the media relationship with the players is already tough enough as it is, made worse by COVID. Like, it's not good for anybody involved.
Yeah, and players already don't know what the hell the media is anyway. Like, I swear to God, they don't know. They just say the media, and they it's such a broad brush. Because that does include Stephen A. Smith, right? Like Stephen A. Smith is media. And but Stephen A. Smith is not media. He's just a guy who's paid to yell strong opinions. And it's not my cup of tea. Like that's not my thing.
I love him, but yeah,
people love him. And he's supposed to scream things about Jayson Tatum that don't make sense. because the other person on the other side is supposed to scream other things that do make sense, and they're supposed to be loud, and people love that entertaining back and forth. It's a game, but that's not me. That's not me walking in there just trying to do a game story and trying to figure out a way to tell people what happened against the Pistons the other night. Like, but we're all lumped in together. And so when I ask a question, it's like, oh, there's the media again. I'm like, oh, God damn. It's my number one pet peeve because, like, I get it. But also, like, take a little time to say, to discern the difference, because we're not going to go out there and be like, all NBA players are like this. Like, we're not going to paint with that broad a brush and say every NBA player acts the exact same way, you know?
Yeah.
So don't do that to us. Like, just a modicum of, like, respect to understand the differences in the different jobs in the media. That's all.
One, you're right, because, like, I mean, one thing that happens too is, like, from a fan perspective, a lot of times it's hard to differentiate because you don't know who's in a locker room and who's just, kind of tweeting, something they saw on TV or whatever it might be. You don't know, like, I know that can be complicated. And I think, for players too, I think sometimes, like, the noise of the quote unquote media, like that a lot of times isn't even like social, like isn't even Stephen A. Smith. That's like social media. That's like, stuff, like stuff that's being intentionally taken out of context to generate engagement, all that stuff. All of that aside, I mean, like, I didn't get the impression that, like, Tatum was, like, lumping the media together in his comments. I mean, his point was more like media members should not be the ones deciding all NBA. And on that, it's like, that's almost like inarguable to me.
100%. So, that's 100%. Yeah. All right. Well, that's the Jayson Tatum Old Man in the 3 podcast review.
That's a segment of it, man. That podcast is going to be really good.
That was 11 minutes, and we got 40 plus minutes of content out of that. So
honestly, last thing on, like, from me though, like, that's that version of Jayson Tatum that was on that podcast. He's been so much more like that with the media. You're not quite to that extent, obviously, because, again, former player thing. But man, he has been, like, engaging and interesting and just a lot.
Yeah,
like,
he's opened up.
Interesting to talk to this year. It's cool.
Yeah, it's good to see. Like, takes a little while. Everything takes a little bit of while.
He was 21 before. Like, yeah, that makes sense, man.
I know. We so want everybody to come into the league fully formed, and he almost
did. He was like as close as it gets to being fully formed.
He really was. Really was. And we forget, man. He's still what, 23, 24?
23 until next month. Yeah.
23. Like, you think about all of that. Like, what were you like at 23? What was
I was in a hardcore band, Karalis? You know this.
Yes, I know. But, like, no one at 23 is as polished and responsible as these athletes at 23. And yet we're, like, still hammering home and you're not mature enough. Like, what 23-year-old is as mature as Jayson Tatum even in that clip?
Yeah.
I've completely lost the ability to speak. I'm like gurgling and mumbling now. So this is a good place to wrap up the podcast. Tom Westerholm, thanks for hopping on again. Appreciate you coming by, man.
Always happy to gurgle and mumble on your podcast here.
It's Locked On Gurgling and Mumbling here, and I hope you're enjoying the gurgles and mumbles enough to subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast. This has been a great week for the podcast between the trade deadline and 9 in a row and the blowout of Philly. A lot of people have been coming by, subscribing and watching and listening. So I do thank everybody for doing so. It's been great to see the numbers. Hopefully you stick around and hopefully you share the podcast. Those of you who are subscribed on the podcast and on YouTube, tell your friends, tell your family, tell everybody. They should be listening to and watching the Locked On Celtics podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.